واتقوا الله ويعلمكم الله والله بكل شيء عليم.
Now let's move on to a tafsir. So when it comes to a tafsir, the tafsir is not an easy science. You have to have a certain level of knowledge to really benefit from tafsir. So I'll mention some beginner introductory or some beginner level books in tafsir, and then we'll move on to how a person can really benefit from tafsir, inshallah ta'ala. So when it comes to a tafsir, something a person can start off with is a tafsir al-muyassar or a tafsir al-mukhtasar. They're two very short tafsir. And the way they do tafsir is that they just explain to you the verse in a simple manner. They don't go into why the verse was revealed, a hadith behind the verse. They don't talk about the difference of opinions in the verse. They just give you a basic understanding of the verse, right? So pick one of the two. They're very two small books, right? Small tafsir. Then after that, you can move on to Tafsir al-Sa'di by Shaykh Abdurrahman Nasir al-Sa'di, rahimahullah, and benefit from that tafsir. You can really benefit from it. It's not a large tafsir in comparison to all the other tafsir, right? It's not very detailed. The Shaykh, he doesn't mention a hadith and reasons why the verse was revealed as much as you would find in the other books of tafsir, but he tries to simplify the meaning for you and tries to make you understand the Quran properly, right? Tries to make the tafsir of the Quran enter your heart in the way he's trying to explain it to you. He's trying to make it understandable to everybody, whether you're a student of knowledge or not. So benefit from that book of tafsir. Once you've completed that, then the reality of tafsir is, if you want to become mutamakkin and strong in tafsir, you have to read these large books of tafsir that you see, right? You shouldn't be scared of these large books of tafsir. When you look at Tafsir al-Qurtubi and you see how many volumes it is, or if you look at certain prints of Tafsir ibn Kathir and you see it's like 7 volumes, or if you look at At-Tahrir al-Tanwir, or if you look at Al-Muharrar al-Wajiz, or all the other tafasir that you find, and you see that some are 10, some are 8, some are 9, some are 12, maybe even 20 volumes. The reality is, if you're a student of knowledge, reading has to become something natural to you. You have to be a reader, right? You have to be a person who loves to read. You shouldn't be scared of books that are 10, 20 volumes. You should be happy when you see all of these volumes, that you're going to attain a lot of knowledge from these books. So, a person or a talib ilm should make sure he also reads Tafsir ibn Kathir before he dives into these other bigger books, right? He should not overlook Tafsir ibn Kathir, even though he may come back to it at a later date and benefit from it while he's benefiting from the other books of tafsir. But make sure you have read Tafsir ibn Kathir and have an overview of it, right? So you know certain ahadith and certain opinions narrated that are pertain to certain verses, and you have a general understanding of Tafsir bil Ma'thur, right? Tafsir when it comes to it being the Quran being explained by narrations of the Prophet ﷺ and by the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. Now, after that, for you to be really good at tafsir, like I mentioned, you have to go into the bigger books and benefit from the bigger books. And there's certain things you need to look for when it comes to the surah before you even jump into the verses of it. And then there's certain things you need to look for when it comes to the verses of each of the surah, right? And the reality is, it's difficult to find a tafsir, one book of tafsir that concentrates and mentions all of these different angles and all of these different things. Sometimes you'll see a book of tafsir and it'll mention and concentrate on the narrations of the Sahaba and the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, and it might not give much importance to that which is related to the Arabic language and balagha and stuff like that. And you might find another tafsir that's the complete opposite. It might mention some verses, some narrations here and there, but it concentrates heavily on that which is related to the Arabic language. You might find a tafsir that kind of joins between the both of them and may miss out certain things here and there. But generally, it covers a lot of things related to the surah and related to the verse, or the verses in that surah that you're trying to understand. Now, pick one of these bigger books that you want to read, right? So some of the ulama, they mention that a person can heavily rely upon Al-Muharrar Al-Wajiz by Ibn Atiyah. So say if you were to pick that book, and on top of that, you're going to need to benefit from the other books of tafsir, and maybe even other books in specific issues related to tafsir, right? Now, say if you pick up Al-Muharrar Al-Wajiz by Ibn Atiyah, and you start off with Surah Al-Fatiha. Even though it's better, right? It's better to start off with Juz Amma. Because when you start off with Juz Amma, you're more likely to finish the tafsir of the chapters of the Quran, because these chapters are small. And it'll give you confidence, and it'll kind of boost you to carry on to reading the other tafsir. And even when the ulama in the past, when they used to write the tafsir of the Quran, a lot of them would start with the smaller chapters of the Quran, and then they would move on to the larger chapters, right? Because some would say that it would help them stay motivated, right? Because they completed a small chapter, then they went on to complete a chapter that was maybe 3 pages, then 4 pages, then 15, then 20 pages. Then they could go on to explain chapters of the Quran that are maybe 2 juz, 2.5, right? So let's just say, for example, you start off with Surah Al-Fatiha. You pick up Al-Muharrar Al-Wajiz. One thing you should do, first of all, is look at the surah, right? The chapter of the Quran. What is its name? What's the name of this chapter of the Quran? And why does the name play such an importance? The reason why is because the more names a surah has, the more important that surah is, right? And a lot of the time, these bigger books of tafsir, they will mention the different names. So what you can write next to it is a tasmiyah, the name, all right? Name of the surah. You haven't even jumped into the first verse of Surah Al-Fatiha just yet. So you're trying to figure out the name of the surah. And there's other books specified to names of the Quran, or names of the chapters in the Quran, right? And you can benefit from those other books as well. After that, try and figure out what type of surah it is. Is it a Surah Al-Makkiyah or Surah Al-Madaniyah? Is it a surah that was revealed before the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah, or is it a surah that was revealed after the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah? A lot of the time, you'll see at the beginning that they'll mention Surah Al-Makkiyah or Surah Al-Madaniyah, or sometimes they might mention some khilaf, if there's a difference of opinion in it. So next to it, you can write Naw' al-Surah, the type of the surah. Then you want to look for, when was this surah revealed, right? Was it revealed before a certain instance, after a certain instance in the life of the Prophet ﷺ? The reason why that's important is because it will help you understand the verses in the surah, right? So if you find verses that were related to something that happened before an instant, something that happened in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll know that it's not talking about something that happened at a later date in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. A lot of the time you'll find that at the beginning of the surah. They might mention that it was revealed before this surah, or revealed before this battle, or before this happened to the Prophet ﷺ, or when this was happening, right? Then you want to find out the amount of verses in the surah, right? You want to see how many verses are in the surah. And all of this you'll see at the beginning of the chapter of this tafsir. But the reason why I'm kind of splitting it up is so you yourself can split it up, right? You can just write next to it, so you can process it a lot easier. So at the beginning, you know, okay, this is the name of the surah, this is the different names. Now next to it, I'm going to write names of the surah. Then when you come across when it was revealed, you can write that down as well. on all of these other issues. So it kind of breaks it down easier for you. All right. Now, you want to find out how many verses are in this surah. And that's important because someone might come up to you, right? An Orientalist might say to you, you don't know anything about the Quran. You don't know anything about your own book. Do you know that Uthman radiallahu anhu couldn't fit all of the verses of Surah Al-Ahzab into the Quran, so he left them out. Surah Al-Ahzab was over 200 verses. So if you were a person who didn't know that Surah Al-Ahzab was not 200 verses and that this narration is a fabrication, it's not even true, this might cause some type of doubt in your religion. You might be shaken because of this, right? So it's important for you to know the amount of verses in the surah. And a lot of the time, the Mufassirun will mention this at the beginning. And the issue is, a lot of the time they'll mention it all in one paragraph. That's why it's important for you to kind of split it up, right? You can write next to it the amount of adad al-ayat, right? After that, fadl هذه surah, the virtue of this specific surah. And a lot of the time the Mufassirun will mention certain narrations, certain ahadith. And you can then go on to see if these are authentic or not at a later date. Maybe you can do your own research if the Mufassir didn't give a ruling on this hadith, or if it's not mentioned in the hashiyah or in the footnotes. And another thing, and this is very important, right? You want to know what is the maqsood of this surah. What's the idea behind this surah? What's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trying to tell us? What's the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to pass on to us through this surah, right? And you'll find specific books for that, if the Mufassir himself did not mention it. So maybe you can go back to specific books. Ibn Ashur, if I remember correctly, has a book on it. Maybe you can open up the book of Ibn Ashur, find it, see what the maqsood of the surah is, write it down in the book of Tafseer that you're reading. Now, then you can move on to the verse, right? After you've understood these things related to the surah, right? You know when it was revealed, you know the names, you know the idea behind it, what the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to send across, what the main message in this surah is, the amount of verses, you know the virtue of it, right? So you have a way to process it in your head. You have it in order. Now, okay, you can move on to the verses in this specific chapter. The first thing you want to find out is, why was this verse revealed? Is there a reason why this verse was revealed? Did something happen so this verse could be revealed? Did the Sahaba ask the Prophet ﷺ a question so this verse could be revealed? Most or a lot of the Quran, you'll find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it without there being a reason for it being revealed, in terms of someone asking the Prophet ﷺ a question or something happening in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. But in other parts of the Quran, you'll see it, right? قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا. You'll see the verses in Surah Al-Anfal, they're related to certain battles in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The same when it comes to Surah At-Tawbah, right? When it comes to اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم, or when it comes to يسألونك عن الروح قل الروح من أمر ربي, right? In certain places in the Quran, you'll find that these verses may have been revealed because something happened, or something was asked to the Prophet ﷺ. So, if you don't know why this verse was revealed, or you can't find out, no problem. If there is no reason, no problem. Okay? Try and find out all these other things related to the verse. And a lot of the time you'll see this in the tafsir itself. So you might be able to just point it out instead of trying to look for it in a different book of tafsir. Then there might be a word that's considered to be gharib, right? A word that may need more explaining. It's not a very clear and apparent word. So if the mufassir has explained it properly, then alhamdulillah, right? You can write next to it al-gharib, lafdun gharib. If the mufassir, right, hasn't explained it and just maybe gave a muradif a word that's similar to it, you can go back to another book of tafsir. Maybe you want to open up At-Tahrir wa Tanwir, right? And see what Ibn Ashur said about it. Or maybe you want to open up other books that are specific to this, right? Specific to al-alfaz al-ghariba in the Quran. Ibn Qutaybah has an excellent book on this. Now, if there isn't a lafz, a word that's a gharib, and everything in that verse is apparent, then maybe you can move on to looking for something else. See if there's any different qira'at, right? Different ways of reciting this verse. And what are the different rulings that can come from reciting it differently? That's very important. You'll gain a lot of knowledge from that. If there isn't, then alhamdulillah, carry on. And a lot of the time you might find the mufassir mention it, so just right next to it. Right next to it. Al-qira'at wa tawjihuha. Now after that, you want to look for al-ma'na al-ijmali. Al-ma'na al-ijmali, the general meaning. And Ibn Atiyah rahimahullah, Ibn Atiyah is very good when it comes to the general meaning. Very good. So you can write next to it al-ma'na al-ijmali on the tafsir. And then maybe you want to see if there's anything related to the Arabic language that can be extracted from it, right? Al-Fawaid al-Lughawiyya. Maybe you want to go back to At-Tahrir wa Tanwir and see how Ibn Ashur extracted certain benefits from the Quran based on the Arabic language, and how this word relates to the meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to pass on to you, right? Or how this word relates to something that happened to the life in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for example, the word Kawthar, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar, how does the word Kawthar relate to al-Abtar, to which they used to call the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? They used to call him sallallahu alaihi wasallam al-Abtar. So what's the relation between al-Kawthar and al-Abtar? Ibn Ashuri mentioned something very beneficial. Maybe you could take that down. Now, after that, maybe you want to see what the khilaf al-tafsiri is. What's the difference of opinion related to this specific verse? Is the khilaf tanawwu' or khilaf tadad? Inshallah ta'ala, you'll get to that at a later stage. Is it this type of tafsir, khilaf, where there's a difference of opinion, but the difference of opinion can all leads back to one meaning? Or is it a differing where the differing doesn't lead back to the same meaning? Yeah. And then maybe qawa'id al-tarjih, principles of tarjih that you learned when you studied usul al-tafsir, can come into play. And you can benefit and see how some mufassirun use these principles to say that this opinion is stronger than this opinion. And a lot of the time you see Ibn Jarir in his tafsir, he uses many principles. And you can see how he says that this opinion is stronger based on this principle. And this principle is extracted from maybe the language, right? Or certain principles that come from the Sharia itself. After that, you want to see if there's anything related to al-nasikh wal-mansukh. Is this verse abrogated, or has it abrogated another verse? And if it is related to this, a lot of the time you'll see it mentioned. And if you can't, then maybe try and find out in another book if it is. And if you do find out, then maybe write it down on that book of tafsir that you're reading through. Then after that, you want to find out the ahkam, and if there's any rulings that come from this verse, any other fawaid that can be extracted from it, right? So you have a general understanding of the verse. You know when it was revealed, why it was revealed, you know the language behind it, you know the rulings pertaining to it, you know if it's abrogated or if it abrogated another verse, you know if there's any different type of qira'at related to the verse, right? So when it comes to trying to find out all of these different things, as I mentioned before, you might find one tafsir that mentions a lot of these things, but might not mention every single thing. That's why you have to gather a few tafsir and maybe a few books that are specific to this issue and benefit from them altogether. So you can kind of benefit from all of these things. And this, you can only really benefit from this once you're grounded, firmly grounded. And you have the tools of a talib ilm, the tools of a student of knowledge. You know the foundational sciences. You've studied certain ulum to a certain level, certain sciences to an intermediate or an advanced level. And once you've done that for so do that for the whole surah. And that's why I said it's better for you to start from the end of the Quran. Why? Because then you're more likely to finish the chapters. So if you start from Surah An-Nas, you find many of these things are unavailable. So you'll be able to finish Surah An-Nas quickly. Then Al-Falaq. Then Surah Al-Ikhlas. Then carry on up until you finish Juz' Amma. Then after that, Juz' Tabarak. Then after that, Juz' Qad Sami'. Carry on like that until you finish the Quran. And you would be firmly grounded. You'd have a vast amount of knowledge when it comes to tafsir. And I'll repeat this. You can't rely on one book of tafsir. You have to benefit from all the other books of tafsir as well. Inshallah ta'ala, I'll try and mention something in the description where I'll mention a PDF, or put PDF there, where it has these things in order, things related to the verse, and things related to the chapter of the Quran, and things related to the verse, and then certain books that talk about these specific issues. Inshallah ta'ala.